A transgender fashion model from Brooklyn was arrested on severe criminal charges in late December of 2022. Nikki Secondino, aged 22, was accused of resorting to extreme violence to settle an argument with her father over a laptop. Law enforcement records revealed that Secondino's 61-year-old father, Carlo, fell asleep on the couch after their spat. While he was unresponsive, the young model retrieved a claw hammer and bashed him over the head with it. She then stabbed him multiple times with her favorite German steel knife. Secondino's younger sister Leanna subsequently stepped in to try and stop her, but was consequently stabbed with the knife several times as well, sustaining injuries to the hands, body, and face. When emergency crews arrived at the scene, Leanna told responding police officers, "My sister stabbed me," before being transported to the hospital in critical condition. Carlo, meanwhile, was immediately pronounced dead. Following the violence, Secondino ran from the house screaming that someone had broken into the home and attacked her family. However, after speaking with Leanna and reviewing the crime scene further, investigators determined that Secondino herself had in fact been the perpetrator. The Instagram influencer was therefore taken into custody on charges of second-degree murder, second-degree attempted murder, and 2 counts of fourth-degree criminal possession of a weapon. In the incident's aftermath, other details emerged regarding Secondino's already contentious relationship with her family. Back in July of 2022, the young woman called the police claiming her father had threatened to kill her. Only 2 days after that, Leanna was charged with assault and criminal mischief for allegedly destroying window blinds and slicing Secondino's hand. Number 5. Mad Dog Rollins. In April of 2019, a Welsh couple got into a heated row at their flat in Glynronda Street in Cathays, a community located in the centre of Cardiff. 23-year-old Mad Dog Rollins had reportedly been violent towards his fiancée prior to the argument in question, including when he was accused of trying to strangle 21-year-old Lauren Griffiths. He was described as having been self-absorbed and manipulative throughout their relationship. However, following the aforementioned altercation, the couple eventually reconciled and the police investigation into Rollins was discontinued. On the 29th of April, tensions between Rollins and Griffiths flared once again. The former strangled the young woman until she lost consciousness, after which he neglected to contact the authorities for a prolonged period of time. Instead, Roland purchased drugs, then set up a Netflix account, ordered takeaway, and ate a sandwich next to the victim's lifeless body. It took over 30 hours for the man to finally call 999, whereupon he claimed that the incident had only just happened. He tried to paint Griffiths as the primary aggressor of the deadly altercation, claiming she'd attempted to grab him by the throat while purportedly in the throes of a mental health episode. Roland's self-defense claims were roundly rejected, and he was taken into custody on murder charges. Following his arrest, the cold-blooded killer searched how to show remorse on the internet, but his efforts to appear contrite evidently proved unsuccessful. In February of 2021, he was jailed for life, with his minimum term set at 18 years. Number 4. Darren Wint. A hostage situation unfolded at the Savopoulos household in Washington, D.C. on May the 13th of 2015. The Savopoulos family was described as a prominent fixture of the Woodley Park neighborhood of Northwest Washington. 46-year-old Sava Savopoulos was the CEO and president of American Iron Works, a construction company involved in the creation of Capital One Arena, where many of the city's professional and collegiate sports teams play home games. On the day in question, a male intruder forced his way into the family's mansion and tied up Savas, his wife and son, as well as their housekeeper. The 4 victims were subsequently held captive and subjected to prolonged torture at the hands of the perpetrator, who was trying to coerce $40,000 in cash from them. The hostages were each eventually killed after sustaining blunt force trauma, with Philip, the son, also having been stabbed. Having secured the ransom money, the intruder then set fire to the house and stole the family's Porsche, which was later found burned at a church in Maryland. During the course of the 19-hour home invasion, the suspect had reportedly ordered a pizza from Domino's. Investigators managed to recover DNA from the pizza's discarded crust, which was ultimately linked to a man by the name of Darren Wint. The latter was a certified welder who'd previously been employed by American Iron Works, leading police to surmise that the murders hadn't been random, but a targeted attack by a disgruntled former employee. Wint was located in northeast D.C. about a week after the incident, whereupon he was arrested on a first-degree murder charge. Although prosecutors contended that the man had received help killing the victims, no one else was ever identified or charged. When asked whether he wished to address the court during the resulting trial, Wint simply said no. He was ultimately convicted on 20 counts of kidnapping, extortion, and murder. The judge described the quadruple homicide as incomprehensible, heinous, atrocious, and cruel, as he sentenced Wint to life without parole. Although the verdict was subsequently appealed, the D.C. Court of Appeals upheld Wint's conviction in December of 2022, denying him a new trial. Number 3. Neil Stimson. A stolen Ford Fiesta was spotted traveling along the A505 near Letchworth in Hertfordshire, England, on the evening of April the 22nd of 2020. As police engaged, the man behind the wheel of the Fiesta reportedly started driving on the wrong side of the roadway. The driver then left the motorway at Junction 10, but once again started driving the wrong way after officers continued their pursuit. As the thief attempted his escape, the Fiesta ended up plowing directly into an oncoming van in the roundabout near Baldock Services. 2 occupants were found inside the stolen car. 44-year-old Neil Stimson from Robert Hunt Gardens, Sandy, and a 47-year-old passenger who was left in a coma in the crash's aftermath. According to local law enforcement, Stimson had tried to steal a delivery van earlier on the same afternoon. The driver had left her keys on the seat while making her deliveries. The man only managed to drive a short distance down the road before the delivery woman jumped in the passenger seat to stop him. Stimson punched the woman in the face, then took the van keys and ran off. For his various offenses, which included robbery and causing serious injury through dangerous driving, Stimson was jailed for 7.5 years and was disqualified from driving for a period of 10 years and 9 months. In handing down the man's punishment, the judge at St. Albans District Court condemned him for refusing to take responsibility for his actions while remarking it was a miracle that no one had been killed. Number 2. Grant Pickett's. 41-year-old Grant Pickett's targeted the same house on Billin Road in Northampton, East Midlands, England, for multiple burglaries in September and October of 2020. The man reportedly broke into the home whenever the owner would leave to care for a friend. Among the items Pickett's pilfered were jewelry, a television set, and other electronic devices. Pickett's, who police described as having caused nothing but misery in his adult life, also raided the victim's fridge and, on one occasion, stole medals that had been presented to the homeowner's father for his service in the Wiltshire Regiment during World War II. Law enforcement launched an extensive investigation into the burglaries, which eventually led to Pickett's being identified and arrested. Despite the best efforts of investigators, the whereabouts of the stolen World War II medals were never determined, and Pickett's refused to reveal where he hid them. The police further described the suspect as a remorseless individual who'd chosen to spend a large portion of his life stealing belongings from hard-working people as opposed to working hard himself. In December of 2020, Pickett was found guilty of the thefts at Northampton Crown Court and was consequently jailed for 3 years. Still itching for more? Then stay tuned after number 1 to watch our earlier release on when parolees go wrong. Number 1. Joshua Commissaresky. On July the 22nd of 2007, Connecticut woman Jennifer Hawk Pickett took her daughter grocery shopping at a Stop and Shop in Cheshire. Unbeknownst to them, while they were picking up food for a family dinner, another shopper noticed them and took interest. Allegedly motivated by money and an attraction to Hawk Pickett's daughter, Joshua Commissaresky proceeded to follow the two back home before orchestrating a home invasion with an accomplice named Stephen Hayes, whom he'd met at the Silliman halfway house the previous year. According to later findings, Hayes and Commissaresky had originally planned to rob the Pickett residence but leave the family unharmed. However, upon their arrival at the Cheshire home in the early hours of July the 23rd, the plan changed. After breaking in through the basement, Commissaresky encountered Hawk Pickett's husband, Dr. William Pickett, asleep on a couch in the sunroom. The intruder struck Dr. Pickett with a baseball bat multiple times before he and Hayes bound the sleeping man's wrists and ankles with zip ties and rope. The children and their mother were subsequently bound in similar fashion in their respective bedrooms. Commissaresky and Hayes then ransacked the place but were unsatisfied with the amount of cash they managed to find. Hayes thus took Hawk Pickett to the bank to withdraw $15,000 from her line of credit. The woman was able to alert the teller as to her family's hostage situation, and the bank manager dialed 911 as she left with Hayes. After returning to the house, Commissaresky assaulted the couple's daughter, whom he'd initially noticed at the grocery store. Hayes later indicated that the man's actions provoked her into abusing Hawk Pickett in a similar manner. As the assault was unfolded in the living room, Commissaresky learned that Dr. Pickett had made a run for it, at which point Hayes strangled Hawk Pickett. The intruders subsequently doused the home with gasoline and set it alight, causing the two Pickett daughters to die of smoke inhalation. Following the home invasion, which had lasted a reported 7 hours, commissaresky and Hayes fled in the family's car, which they ended up crashing into a police vehicle. They both confessed to the murders following their resulting arrest. By 2012, both perpetrators had been tried, convicted, and sentenced to death in Connecticut court. Throughout the criminal proceedings and in interviews with the press, Commissaresky exhibited no remorse for his actions. He further puzzled and infuriated people after saying he never thought about the victims, didn't lose sleep over his crimes, and had nothing to say to Dr. Pickett, the only survivor of the brutal onslaught. The Connecticut Supreme Court eventually ruled that the death penalty was unconstitutional, so both Commissaresky and Hayes had their punishments commuted to life sentences. Number 8. Estacio Galis. While serving out a life sentence stemming from a murder conviction, Estacio Galis, aged 51, was granted day parole. The conditional release meant that he was allowed to participate in public activities during the day as long as he returned to his halfway house nightly. Galis had grown close to 22-year-old Marilyn Levesque, an escort who worked at an erotic massage parlor. On January the 22nd of 2020, the two met at a restaurant before checking into a hotel in Sainte Foy, a borough of Quebec City. It was there that Galis reportedly stabbed Levesque a total of 30 times. He'd originally planned to take his own life after carrying out the murder, but he instead decided on surrendering to the authorities. Levesque had reportedly grown distant from Galis in the period leading up to her death. He'd thus become jealous and angry as a result of their deteriorating relationship, and ultimately resorted to killing her. He was first charged with second-degree murder, but those charges were eventually upgraded to murder in the first degree. He was given a second life sentence without the possibility of parole for 25 years. The incident that led to his initial incarceration had taken place in 2004. Galis repeatedly stabbed his ex-wife, Chantal Deschamps, after striking her head with a hammer. His murderous rage had reportedly been triggered by her decision to leave him, and the violent attack had led to a life sentence with no chance of parole for 15 years. In November of 2021, a Quebec coroner ruled that Levesque's brutal death could have been avoided if Galis had been ordered to wear an ankle monitor as part of his parole agreement. The coroner also recommended that equipping violent criminals with these monitors become standard procedure when they're released on parole. Number 7. James Dakota Branson and Annika Celeste Thorpe. A 57-year-old Utah woman was found dead in her friend's driveway after being shot by two parolees during a random carjacking. The perpetrators, identified as 24-year-old James Dakota Branson and Annika Celeste Thorpe, aged 23, had previously faced a slew of other charges that were mostly drug and theft related. According to reports, the pair killed Linda Nemelka, a mother of 5, on March the 11th of 2020. While attempting to steal her car. Due to the random nature of the crime, police struggled to identify any suspects during the ensuing investigation. It took more than a year for law enforcement to zero in on Branson and Thorpe as the likely culprits. By then, both of them were already behind bars for completely unrelated offenses. Branson had been arrested by narcotics detectives less than a day after killing Nemelka, and Thorpe was back in custody on felony theft charges just 5 days after the shooting had taken place. Investigators found DNA on the murder weapon that matched both Branson and Thorpe, and the two were subsequently charged with Nemelka's murder. Number 6. Leland Guy Eagle Jr. A 36-year-old parolee was arrested for murdering his romantic partner after previously being convicted of other violent offenses. The body of Crystal Nelson, also aged 36, was discovered by the housekeeping staff at the Clarion Point Motel in Fresno, California. The victim had been fatally shot by a male acquaintance, later identified as Leland Guy Eagle Jr., who was out on parole for a past offense. The two were captured on surveillance cameras, entering the motel together several hours before her death. Police arrived at Eagle's paroled address after determining the former inmate to have been the perpetrator of Nelson's killing. He was taken into custody and booked into the Fresno County Jail. He faced multiple charges stemming from the murder and the associated parole violation. Number 5. Christine Shreve Hubbs. After being incarcerated for engaging in intimate activities with two teenagers, 44-year-old Christine Shreve Hubbs of Livermore, California, was arrested again just 5 days after being released on parole. Hubbs had pleaded no contest to the charges associated with her past crimes. In 2011, she reportedly had improper contact with the two teenage victims. From 2008 to 2010, she first pursued one of the boys when he was romantically involved with her teenage daughter. Hubbs was accused of luring her victims by giving them cash, expensive presents, and special cell phones they used to secretly communicate with her. She was arrested after the mother of one of the victims discovered explicit photographs of Hubbs on his phone. After being released from prison in February of 2013, Hubbs found herself back behind bars less than a week later. State parole agents made a surprise compliance visit to her residence, during which they found adult content within her possession, which was a violation of her parole. Following her arrest, the two victims of her previous crimes were harassed on social media by Hubbs' friends and family members. Livermore police subsequently investigated whether the threatening messages required any legal action to be taken against those involved. Number 4. Marco Quintanilla. A 19-year-old woman was murdered during Halloween weekend 2021, and the resulting investigation led to the arrest of 3 individuals, including an active duty member of the United States Air Force. The victim of the violent crime was Leland Beauchamp, who was last seen leaving a Halloween party in the early morning hours of October the 30th. She was accompanied by 2 airmen identified as Juan Peralta, aged 20, and his roommate. Beauchamp's remains were later found by officers of the Fairfield Police Department in California on October the 31st. After a joint investigation by Fairfield Police and members of the Travis Air Force Base's Office of Special Investigations, it was established that Beauchamp had been murdered at Peralta's residence. The crime itself was carried out by a 27-year-old parolee named Marco Quintanilla and his sister, Jessica, aged 21. The authorities ultimately determined that Jessica had been the one to fatally shoot Beauchamp inside of Peralta's home, and Marco had subsequently tried to cover up the crime by hiding the body roughly 100 miles from the scene of the crime. Peralta was not charged in connection to the murder and had returned to the Travis Air Force Base as of November the 4th of 2021. Jessica Quintanilla was charged with the murder of Beauchamp, while Marco faced an accessory to murder charge, in addition to a parole violation. Number 3. Abdullah Sanchez. Abdullah Sanchez, aged 20, was arrested after fleeing from a traffic stop in Stockton, California, in October of 2019. Just a month prior to the incident, Sanchez had been released on parole after serving more than 2 years in prison on a gross vehicular manslaughter conviction. The event that led to her initial imprisonment had taken place on July the 21st of 2017. She had crashed her car while driving under the influence of alcohol. The accident took the life of Sanchez's sister and severely injured another passenger in the vehicle. Sanchez reportedly live-streamed the entire ordeal on Instagram, and the video recording was subsequently used by prosecutors in support of their case against her. The young woman's second arrest was precipitated by a brief police chase at approximately 1:30 a.m. The pursuit was prompted by Sanchez's refusal to pull over for an officer attempting to initiate a traffic stop. Sanchez eventually drove her car off the road near a highway ramp off Interstate 5. A male passenger fled the scene after the crash while Sanchez was taken into custody. Officers discovered a loaded gun inside the vehicle, which led to Sanchez facing weapons charges in addition to the traffic-related offenses. Number 2. James Craig Dobson. A man convicted of criminally negligent homicide in connection to the beating and fatal stabbing of a homeless man in Boulder, Colorado, was granted parole in July of 2021. Upon his release, 60-year-old James Craig Dobson violated the terms of his newfound freedom and subsequently took part in a burglary. After he failed to check in with his supervision officers, a warrant for Dobson's arrest was issued. He was ultimately found by members of Boulder law enforcement who were investigating reports of a theft of frozen foods from an outdoor freezer. The arresting officers noted that Dobson appeared to be under the influence of alcohol, an additional violation of his parole. In September of 2021, he was charged with second-degree burglary, theft, and violation of a restraining order. Dobson had previously been charged with second-degree murder after he was found guilty of inflicting the wounds that had taken the life of Ronald DeQuina in 2018. Dobson had reportedly assaulted DeQuina and left him lying in a pool of his own blood. Although he was ultimately spared of the murder charge, Dobson was convicted of criminally negligent homicide and sentenced to 5 years in prison. He was allowed out on parole after serving just 3 years of his term. Number 1. Brian Goldsby. a 21-year-old student at Ohio State University, was murdered by a man previously in prison for robbing and taking advantage of a pregnant woman. On February the 8th of 2017, Regan Tokes was leaving her job at a restaurant and bar called Bodega in downtown Columbus. The young woman was abducted by Brian Goldsby, a felon who'd been granted an early release from his 6-year prison sentence in November of 2016. Goldsby forced Tokes to drive him to 2 different ATMs to withdraw cash. He subsequently abused her inside of the vehicle and then made the decision to murder her in order to conceal his crimes. He made Tokes drive to Scioto Grove Metro Park in Grove City. She was then ordered to remove all of her clothes, and Goldsby walked her into the middle of a field at gunpoint. He fatally shot her, execution style, in the back and side of the head. After the murder, Goldsby drove to his girlfriend's home and gave her Tokes' purse and wallet as a gift. He then dumped the murder weapon into a sewer and unsuccessfully tried to set Tokes' car on fire to destroy any evidence of the crime. He was eventually tracked down by investigators and remanded into custody by a SWAT team. He was sentenced to life in prison in March of 2018. Thanks for watching. If you were given the opportunity to correct one mistake from your past, what would it be and why? Let us know in the comments section below.